Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, Episode 71.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 71 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Today's sponsor is sellmorefirearms.com, where FFLs can get a free guide on how to use Facebook and social media to sell more firearms in their stores. Today's guest is the Rev Kenn Blanchard. Reverend is a Marine, federal police officer, pastor, was a firearms trainer for the CIA, and now here's Ken.
Reverend Blanchard, welcome to the show.
Man, thank you for the invite. Appreciate being here.
Oh, my pleasure. So, Reverend, you are the host of the Black Man with a Gun podcast. Would you tell us a little about how that all started?
Sure. After a long time, I'm saying since 1991 to 2007 of being a gun rights activist, I discovered podcasting, being on somebody else's show, and decided this was my chance to get on the radio and do what I've always wanted to do. So I started my podcast in 2007, and it's been my way to keep in touch with gun rights activists and just give my twist, a little bit of wit and wisdom, and kind of be the voice of reason, the quiet guy, the responsible gun owners podcast.
And I was reading, so that's actually a lot of time. So from 1999 to 2007, and what happened in 1999 that you decided to get involved in the gun rights movement?
Well, even before then, right around 91, I started becoming a activist in the Second Amendment. Started traveling, working with the National Rifle Association, and we helped change concealed carry in about 4 or 5 states when I was working it. And I was having a blast. I was getting a chance to speak in front of legislatures and meeting all kind of powerful people and changed my whole worldview of things. But it ended right around 99 for me. But at that same time, I created a gun club that started to grow, and I wanted to be able to share stuff online. This is all when Facebook hadn't even started yet, really. We were still using bulletin boards and fax modems and all that. So in 1999, I published my first book, Black Man with a Gun, or Responsible Gun Owners Manual for African Americans, it was called. And I used the website to publish the book and to show the book, to sell the book. And at that time, it took probably 2 or 3 minutes to load the website up. It was so big. At the time, it was phenomenal. I mean, I had James Brown music playing, and only the big corporations and folks could see it because it was just too big, and we were on bold modems back then, so it took too long to go.
All right, and I'm always fascinated by that because I graduated high school in '94, and internet was just starting to take shape, and
I know, right?
I can't imagine doing the types of things we do now then, and you got so much accomplished. You said you helped get concealed carry passed in 5 states. That's something we've been working on in Jersey for forever. What are some of your secrets? How did you manage that?
No, it wasn't myself. It was a team of folks. They would have a person that represented the women. They had a person that talked about minority issues. Another one talked about hunters and folks that you don't normally associate with concealed carry. And then there was a law enforcement angle, and we would kind of pick and choose people in the council that we had affinity with and kind of lobby them. I mean, like, go after them, talk to them, send them notes. And then when we finally got a chance to testify, we knew them by name. So sometimes, like, one of those states I mentioned that did well in Michigan, Virginia, Texas, South Carolina, Wisconsin, I bombed in my own state of Maryland. And New Jersey is probably right next to it. as far as being a tough place to get truth through to.
And I was reading your book, and you mentioned you got kicked out of 2 churches. That sounds like an interesting story. What happened there?
Well, everybody is great with me being on fire for the Lord, for being a Christian, for being a strong father, a responsible person. As soon as I mention that I am pro-gun, that I believe in the right to carry and keep and bear arms, then all of a sudden I'm a Mariah. And the first time it happened, I was a firearms instructor before I started my activism really big. And I had on the back of my pickup truck, Got Guns, blackmanwithagun.com. And this was in the late 90s. And it was too early for that kind of thinking. And I had just become a licensed minister in a Baptist church. And they weren't having it. They loved me when I was the janitor. They loved me when I was singing in the choir. But as soon as I became a minister on the pulpit, I wasn't even a pastor. I was just one of 10 other licentiate ministers. All of a sudden now I was this evil character, and deacons actually had meetings to decide whether they were going to remove my license and kick me out of there, because now I must be a violent person. I must be a killer on the pulpit. And the pastor had to step in and say, just silence, just y'all are foolish, stop what you're doing. But it never went away. They still snickered and looked at me as if I had an extra arm. But then later, I became pastor of a church in Washington, D.C., and everything was fine except for my pro-Second Amendment stance. Every once in a while, you'd get an international visitor, for example, and they would say, we came to visit your church, and our deacons and elders would say, oh, man, that's great. What brings you here? And I said, your pastor. He is the black man with a gun. And you could just look at their face, and the deacon would bow his head. And I knew after a couple of those turns, it wasn't going to be long now before they would either vote me out or I'd have to resign. And I was fine with that, because there were some other issues going on that not very Christian like those. Glad to leave.
So, and that's something that surprises me, because I've heard from a few other folks that there's sort of an anti-gun tendency in Christian churches, but the stereotype is, that Christian gun owners, right-wing Christians, right-wing gun owners, but you're saying that there's a lot of, anti-gun sentiment within the church?
Yeah, and in particular in the black church, in the urban church, see, there's been a stigma that nobody good has a gun. And most of us come from the South, where everybody hunted and had arms for protection and arms for bringing food on the table. But when they moved to the city, only thugs and killers and bad people had guns, and that never went away. So when you have a church which is predominantly made of people who have never fired a gun, never been properly trained, they believe that guns are the root of all evil. And the pastors of these churches supporting the membership is not going to change that, because those are the first people who actually pay their tithes and support him. So he's going to be the first one to champion whatever they promote. No one, maybe even hypocritically, but that's not true. And then later, when he gets threatened, he secretly is the one that's getting a concealed carry permit without knowledge of his congregation. And I've been around long enough to see that happen on more than one occasion.
Wow. So in the book, you kind of say that you can't say it, but I noticed on the website that you were a firearms trainer for the CIA. How did that come about?
When I first started back in '86, I came out of the Marine Corps, and I was a sponge. I walked into a job at the CIA, and they trained me to do a whole bunch of stuff, and I just kept taking the training. I wouldn't say no to anything, and I love to shoot. And the next thing I know, they had me training for armed carry. Back then, everybody carried a gun. The couriers and polygraphers and agents and a whole number of people. So instead of going out and getting Colonel Cooper to train everybody, they would send us to all these different schools around the country, train the trainer, and we come back home and train government people who are going into hostile countries And I got spoiled, man. I started getting trained by some of the best in the world, and not just the U.S. folks, but I was on fire for this thing. And I thought, man, this would be great if I could teach the people in my community and have them not be afraid and stop the accidents. And I'll be like the friendly neighborhood firearms guy. The bad part is I didn't know my history. I didn't know what I was going to be up against when I tried that. The government had told me that we'll allow you to moonlight, but you can't tell anybody how you learned everything, how you got this knowledge. And I looked really, really young at the time. So I was up against a whole bunch of retired police officers that were in the business around the ranges, and they made it hard for me to get an end in. But I made it, but it was tough. And that's what the name kind of came out, Black Man with a Gun. And I'm still forbidden for a long time to even mention the agency. So the website is kind of like a new thing. Since I've been out of there for a while now, I'm good to go. But back then, I still was like the place that I won't name kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's so, I guess, I don't know, shocking isn't the word, but I guess disappointing that you would have all that training and be exposed to all those people and not be able to tell them, how you learned it. And that's really something you're always supposed to find out when you look for firearms training is the trainer's credentials. And here you are, probably one of the best trained people out there, and you have to keep it a secret.
Yeah, I was nuts at the time. At that time, I had I lived in the Maryland area, so I had Maryland State Police firearms certificate. I had GSA. I had DC Metropolitan Police. I had Federal Law Enforcement Training Center from Georgia certified. I was trained out the Union, and that was fine. That part I could tell, but I couldn't throw in the CIA's name there at all, and that was fine. It's just a lot of restrictions. Again, I was way early. I mean, today there are a gazillion trainers that are doing great stuff. Folks want to learn tactics. I had a hard time. Folks didn't want to learn too much.
Yeah, and that is something I've talked about with a few trainers where, the attendance at, First Steps Pistol is good, but then it's much harder to get people to attend higher level classes, shooting in low light, shooting, moving, things like that. What's your experience been with that?
Oh, it's totally correct. Because what I got to do is point, click this thing. That as long as I buy it, I'm good to go. If you make me go through too many hoops, then I'm not trying to do that. I believe that if I just buy this thing and put it in my house and put it in a box somewhere, then all of a sudden it's like an insurance policy, and that's a hard thing to go over. I created a course that would go to the next level. I called it Bam Bam University, and it was probably the most successful course that I had. It was a 2-day thing, and I had it out of town down in Virginia Beach, made it like a really special event, and that worked. That allowed me to get folks out of their norm and get them somewhere else, because if they were home, it would balk at going 8 hours anywhere. But if I took them out of their situation and I actually could put more into them. The negative is I didn't have a range of my own. I didn't have a Thunder Ranch or a farm or a really nice big place. But if you can craft it so you can take your customers away from their routines, you can get more into them.
And so what advice would you have for someone just coming onto the firearm scene? They're thinking about getting a gun. They've heard all the anti-gun rhetoric, but they're starting to decide they need a firearm for personal defense. What would you say to them?
I'd probably try to get them to find at least one resource, one person that they can talk to. Don't go on the internet necessarily. There's so much up there. You can get an overload. Find some some person, are they into sewing or needlecraft or dogs or cats? Find somebody who's a pro-gun person in that area and have that person be the ambassador. That one-on-one works wonders. Sometimes we have so much information and we get none. So try to go closer. Like, you might have to repeat yourself a lot if you want to be the one that is the answer man. But that would be a good thing to do. Make it seem like you're the only one and you're only looking for one, and you got to just do you a lot.
And what are you working on these days? I know you have the podcast and the Black Man with a Gun Reloaded just recently came out. What's in the future?
The next thing is I'm actually trying to develop other podcasters. I've been traveling, doing a lot of podcasting conventions and learning about the medium. I really love how new media has gone, and I'm looking to get some new voices, some new speakers, new kind of like field reporters to actually take some of the stuff that I've been blessed to have, reviewing equipment and stuff, and post it on the site, give them a chance to be a part of the podcast, and let me just be the producer instead of back of it. I'm also moving into writing fiction. I'm a musician as well, and I love to write. So I got a fictional series called Solomon Love that I'm working on right now. It's a blues playing werewolf, and I'm having a blast with this thing. I'm trying to do my own little Harry Potter series and do about 10 books before I call it quits. And I just finished the third one and ready for the editors, and the other two are in Amazon. I just created a website to show people. So I kind of did it and didn't tell anybody I did it. So there's 2 books already out that nobody knew about. But KennBlanchard.com, that's Ken with 2 N's. You can find out all the information about that.
All right, great. Yeah, I'll put that on the show notes page, KennBlanchard.com. And I usually ask people to recommend books, but I've got 5 from you now, right? So,
yeah, man, overachiever.
Yeah. So, this is just something that kind of comes to my mind every once in a while. But you're really into motorcycles, and thoughts on motorcycles and carrying while on a motorcycle and fighting from a motorcycle. Have you? I imagine all the training you've had some training along those lines, but how do you handle that? Do you drop the motorcycle and fight, or try to fight while on the motorcycle?
Most of the time, I think I had one article that I actually got from, I think it was the guy out in Washington State. I'll have to pull that back out. But I'm saying pretty much you'd fight like you would normally. You'd park the bike. And motorcycle has been a threat, though. Whenever you are in a protective detail, and I worked quite a few around the world, motorcycles are bad news when they come up on your limo. It's taken out a couple of generals that way in Latin America. You probably won't get a motorcycle attacking you, but if you're on a bike and you're carrying, there are a lot of places that you can carry off body, which is probably not a bad idea, because if you fall and have to lay your bike down, carrying most places, that thing is going to dig into your body in a bad way. So if you can have it in a bag, a sling, or anything that's not really attached to you, that's going to give just a little bit, or be in one of your backpacks, I think that might be a better move, safety-wise. When I traveled across the country, I kept it in the bike, in a bag, that as soon as I parked, I snagged it and either threw it back on my shoulder or put it back wherever. I got a bag for everything.
That's great. And wow, so I hadn't thought. I was thinking of carrying while you were riding the motorcycle, but yeah, you mentioned people have been assassinated in limos by riders on motorcycles.
It's a big thing for a bad guy.
Huh. And that's something I would have thought about, would have worked in a movie, but as I'm trying to imagine going through the process of doing it, I'm not sure.
You would have it'd be 2 riders. It'd be
2 riders.
Person riding and person was shooting, and it'd come out of nowhere. And I'd have to actually trained on taking out bikes that way.
Wow. So let's see. And so let's see. On the show notes page, we'll have links to KennBlanchard.com, and have all your books up there. I thank you so much for coming on the show. Any parting words for our listeners?
Yeah, just remember that none of us is as strong as all of us. That this gun rights thing is bigger than that. It's about being a responsible citizen. And once you learn that, it changes your whole worldview, that you are responsible for your brother. And it kind of ties back into the religious piece. that we are responsible for each other. And if you do that, then protecting it is a lot easier.
All right. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Man, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Thanks again for tuning in to episode 71 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes page for today is outoforderjameskalita.com/71. If you go to that show notes page, you'll find links to our sponsors as well as to Ken's podcast, to his website, all the stuff we mentioned, all the books we mentioned on the show. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.